Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's absolutely wonderful to be here, and congratulations to both Ben's and to Simon and to the New Economics Foundation for putting this on. I hadn't met Ben until, we met at a 55 Tustin Street seminar a few months ago. When I was elected, I thought I'd be the only person in the sphere of public life talking about fractional reserve banking and other aspects and its ills. So it's fabulous to be here today and to see so many of you. I hope you won't hold it too much against me that I am a Conservative Member of Parliament. Yeah, not yet. You can tell me it's my fault in another 10 years. But setting that aside for a moment, nice if that worked. This is the scope of what I'm going to say. I'd just like to briefly touch on my CV, although Ben's mentioned a couple of things. I'll recap some backgrounds. I'm mostly very happy with what I've heard today. In fact, I've been able to cut out some slides because of what we've heard. I mostly endorse what's been said. In fact, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that's been said from here that I would immediately disagree with perhaps some of the tone here and there, but there we are. I'll talk about the political realities, a strategy, the ramifications of failing in this endeavour, and then I'll finally pose what I think is perhaps the most important question on this matter. So in terms of CV, as Ben has said, I'm ex-Air Force. Just an important thing, I've never been fox hunting. I'm from an ordinary working class background. My dad's a carpenter. And the Conservative Party has changed. Ordinary people from ordinary backgrounds can become Conservative MPs. And I mention that just because this stereotype of the pinstriped, perhaps Eton-schooled MP is not actually wholly accurate. I'm largely very, very impressed by my colleagues, particularly in the new intake. But perhaps we'll perhaps talk about that later. But that's, I think we'll move on. But yeah, I'm a royal... sorry? I'm actually here because I support the aims of positive money, so if you perhaps give me a little bit of credit for that. So I'm an ex-engineer. I'm an engineer through and through. I'm a chartered aerospace engineer. I was on Tornado off-aircraft maintenance. Then I was a Jaguar engineer officer. And finally, I was the engineering authority for the Adur gas turbine fitted to Hawk and to Jaguar. Dot-com boom happened. This is why I'm mentioning my CV, because the Cold War had ended. We thought good had won over evil. We thought that capitalism had won, and then there was this big boom in software. So I thought, off I'll go to software. So in 2000, I went back to university, MSc in computer science at Oxford, and while I was there, at considerable opportunity cost apart from anything else, the whole thing went flat. I thought, why has this happened? I'm having a year off work to do this. How is it that the bubble has burst? And so I discovered something called the Austrian theory of the trade cycle, the monetary theory of the trade cycle, which really clearly explains how all this credit expansion causes debt-fueled booms which must come to an end. But of course I was only a lowly and humble engineer, and I thought if there was anything in this, of course the economists would do something about it to put an end to it all. So I parked it. I got involved with software. I've worked with a range of regulators and banks over the last 10 years, which I'll return to. But then I was at Lehman Brothers, and that was not my fault. But I was the chief technology officer of 2 global programs for Lehman Brothers when the collapse happened. A few quarters of record profits, and then a collapse. And I thought, I know why this has happened. It's the credit expansion in excess of real savings. Off we go. So I then asked a worldwide really head of the Austrian school, who are the best Austrian school economists in the UK? Because we really have to get some of these ideas out into public debate. And so I was introduced to Toby Baxendale and Anthony Evans, who's not here today, and Tim Evans. They're not related. And together we started the Cobden Centre, which was originally Toby's idea. In the 19th century, the greatest injustice against ordinary working people was perhaps the Corn Laws, because they kept wheat expensive, they kept bread expensive, and industrial working people were finding that they were hungry they were worse off because of privileges granted to landowners that kept wheat expensive. And Cobden set out to educate the public about this injustice, this legal privilege which was keeping the poor poor. And he succeeded eventually, from the backbenches, in getting the Corn Laws repealed. And you might notice we're behind the system of trade tariffs on wheat these days, but setting that aside. What year was the Corn Laws repealed? You will ask me these difficult questions. About 1848, isn't it? Something like that. In terms of the thrust of what we're doing, it's very much the same thrust. We're trying to fight the greatest injustice in our society today, an injustice that causes the boom-bust cycle, causes the mass redirection of natural resources, a system which produces a wealth distribution which I believe is not just. You might be starting to wonder if I'm a Conservative MP. I can assure you that I am a Conservative MP. I believe in freedom and responsibility and enterprise. And I believe in people. I don't believe in the state. I believe in the power of people. But I am a Conservative MP. So that really is a bit of a canter through what I've done and where I've come from. As I say, I hope you will give me the benefit of the doubt. One other point, something that Simon said about working in banks. When you're a software engineer, particularly leading people who are analysts, and you've got a number of intelligent people asking people who work in finance, how does your business work? And again and again and again, you find they don't really know and they're muddling through. You start to gain the confidence to talk about these issues. People know how to do their job. They do. They know how to do their job. But people do not study this kind of banking theory that we've been talking about today. On the whole, they don't. They do at the Bank of England, but on the whole, in investment banks and in deposit-taking institutions, they don't. So that's how I personally come to this point. I think we're in a major inflection point in human history. It ties in with the move from modernism to postmodernism. It ties in with the general failing of the state to provide a range of services that people hoped it would succeed in doing. So I'd just like to recap then some of the economic background that explains how I approach these questions. So I've titled this section Statism, Keynes and Hayek. I should perhaps have said Mises, but that's by the way. Did you know that Friedrich Hayek was a socialist? He came back from the First World War a socialist until he read a book and met a man, Ludwig von Mises, who wrote a book, Socialism, an Economic and Sociological Analysis. And from that point, Hayek realised that socialism would not work and that planned societies would not work. He turned and looked another way, and that other way was once known as liberalism. I just want to touch on this. What is money? I've inserted this slide just sitting here earlier because we've talked a lot about money and banking and credit, but what actually is it? Now that's a difficult question. I chaired a 2-day academic colloquium on very much this question, as well as some others around banking, and we spent hours talking about what money actually is. But fundamentally, it is the means of exchange. We mustn't take for granted that we have to produce things, food, clothes, shelter, and so on and so on and so on. They just must be produced. And some of these items are particularly complex, and while you're producing them, designing and so on, you're not producing the basic necessities of life. And so, of course, what we need is an economy based on indirect exchange. And we all know that. But what that requires then is some things like property and contract and a way of indirectly exchanging one thing for another, and that is what money is. And so, of course, that's why money is so important. I believe in society, social cooperation, but most social cooperation is people buying and selling, producing and consuming and exchanging, and they do it through money. So if money's broken, everything's at risk. It's a store of value as well, of course, and that's very important. If you want to save, you really ought to better rely on your money, at least maintaining its value. I asked somebody, an MP who'd worked at the FSA, what is money? And she said to me, money is as money does. Actually, that's a deeply wise thing to say. I think it might be apocryphal, but it's commonly known that in prisons, cigarettes are money. And money emerges. When people need to cooperate, money emerges, and it is as it does. It is, sorry, a bit of a cold. Money is as it does, it facilitates exchange. I know I'm skipping through some things we could discuss for hours here, but money and wealth are not the same. We tend to assume that a person with a lot of money is wealthy. Well, of course they are, but money is not the only aspect of wealth. I'm actually interested in the full range of human flourishing. So I'm interested in health, I'm interested in opportunity, I'm interested in friendships. We could go on. But actually the real stuff that we rely on is wealth. Actually having a house to live in and a family who love you. These things are wealth. My life would be infinitely poorer were I not married to a woman that I love. Now, human flourishing is about more than just money, but without good money, we cannot have a good society. This last point, any reasonable quantity of money is adequate. We could discuss that for hours. But money, whatever it is, whether it's a physical commodity or not, whether it's just ones and noughts, whatever it is, it's subject to the same laws of supply and demand and economics as any other commodity. And so any reasonable quantity of it is adequate, because actually the value of money can increase and decrease based on the same market functions as any other commodity. If you want to explore that in detail, I recommend Ludwig von Mises' The Theory of Money and Credit, which is about, I think, about 500 pages. But that is the key treatise that makes that point. I'll take questions at the end, if I may, because I suspect there could be quite a few. So I just wanted to touch on what is money. At the moment, what we're using for money is, as has been said, it's ones and noughts, it's been loaned into existence, it's what's called fiduciary media, it's taken on trust that it is money, but it doesn't actually represent anything, it's just been loaned into existence. Let's talk then about Leviathan. Now we're starting to get towards the politics, the political economy of this. This is, the blue line is government as a share of factor cost GDP. It's from an IEA paper listed at the bottom right, IEA discussion paper number 24. And the green line is the private spending as a fraction of GDP. GDP is not the whole economy. There's lots of business-to-business spending that isn't in it. But GDP is always used, so I show you this. But before the First World War, and indeed before the welfare state, the government was 10 to 15% of GDP. We then had the total mobilisation of the state for the First World War, up at about 44% of GDP was necessary to win the first total war. We then start on an upward trajectory that goes through 50% for the first time in peacetime in 1979-80ish. Of course, the Second World War intervened, and we had this massive shift in who drives spending in order to win the Second World War. We then continue on this upward trajectory. Might notice these inflection points around 1970 and so on. Thatcher government starts beating things back, but notice where they actually beat the state back to. People talk about this massive rollback of the state. But hang on. The state rolled back to about the level necessary to win the first total war. So I'm unusual because I say that actually Margaret Thatcher did not achieve a massive rollback of the state. She achieved this slight downward trend, which then has been reversed, and now we're heading up through 52% on average of the country for GDP in the UK. If you look at the north of England, it depends who you ask for the figures, but if you look at the north of England, we look at 60-70% of the of GDP is the state. If you look at Northern Ireland, it's, according to some sources, it's up at 80%. This is broadly comparable to the Soviet satellite nations at the end of communism. So this is a crazy level of state participation in the economy. When the state is spending this much money, the state is directing where money goes through the process of social cooperation. So the state is very much directing how the economy is structured and how it works. So that's the growth of Leviathan, the growth of the state. Let's talk about some debt projections. And I actually gave a lengthy interview along these lines for that Martin Durkin documentary, but it was deemed too complex, so Channel 4 took it out. We tried to make it accessible, but there we are. But Martin and I had talked about our debt projection. If you apply the same accounting rules that private companies have to use, if you applied those rules to the state, and you'd have to take in all the pension accruals, it's really like taking these lines and folding them across. These lines are from the Bank for International Settlements, so again, mainstream organisation, projecting the Western world's debt forward to 2040.